The program this afternoon is going to be started off by a very distinguished lady who has been with us before, and you will hear more about her from our moderator, who is a state senator from New Hampshire, who's been a very devoted attendant at these rallies, has been of great help to us before, and I am happy to present to you again Senator John P.H. Chandler of New Hampshire.
Thank you, Colonel Bunker. The lady that you are going to hear this afternoon is no stranger to these rallies. This will be her third appearance as a speaker at the Garden Country Rally. And she is a housewife and a mother and a former school teacher. She's a native and resident of Huntington, West Virginia, and she has been active in all phases of community life and has consistently promoted patriotism, loyalty, and the American family. She was the first nationally known speaker to expose John Dewey and his progressive education as a vehicle and method to change America's basic educational concepts and principles to the modern socialistic dilemma of today. Now, she started exposing progressive education back in 1930. Now that's 41 years ago. So you see that she's a veteran in fighting the good fight and opposing communism. So just a little background about her. She is a graduate of the University of Cincinnati and also of the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. She studied at Marshall University and at the ULCA and at Columbia. She taught both in public and private schools and received many awards and citations for her outstanding contribution in promoting America. Many of her articles, poems, and songs have been published, including a play which has been produced in 13 countries. And I have something in common with the speaker, because she has also been a member of the legislature in her own state. She's been, I guess they call it the Assembly in West Virginia, whereas in New Hampshire they call it the General Court. I've been in both the Senate and the House, and so we have something in common in representing the people in the lawmaking bodies of the state. Mrs. Jessica Payne will speak this afternoon on the topic, Do It Yourself Americanism.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandler. I guess everything's okay between you and me and this thing, right? Is it working? Good. All right. It's good to be in Boston again. It's interesting, though, you know, if you can't get in the Klieg lights in Hollywood, well, come to Boston. That'll fix you up. And it's sort of bad, but I'm sure they have to have them, so it's all right. I'm going to do 2 or 3 things, all of which I hope will be beneficial. I'm sort of known in my part of the woods as an active country saver. I believe in doing things and getting results. I have long ago given up much hopes for Washington, much less anything else in the world. And so I figure the best contribution we can make to saving the United States of America would be to save our own backyard. After all, one time I was asked a question this was in Chicago, and this man stood up and he said, well, Mrs. Payne, how in the world do we get such vice presidents? How do we get such bad presidents of the United States? Do you have an answer for that? And I said, why, surely we do. What'd you elect him dog catcher in the first place for? You once had a chance to stop this man, and we don't screen our people at the local level. So I want to talk about a few things, and then I want to discuss some things with you which we've really done, some projects. In other words, it's practical do-it-yourself Americanism. And I am pretty confident that if we don't get more of this going in the United States, in every community, we may lose the battle. So I would like to, first, as I say, we have to learn to communicate. I hear so much today on television and radio and everything about a lack of communication. The reason the country's going to the dogs, we don't know how to communicate. And the reason this, that, and the other, we have no communication. Well, that's too bad, isn't it? We used to always have communication. We didn't have any trouble about that. Most of us all speak English in this country, and one kind or another. But anyway, this reminded me of such an experience I had with a very great woman who certainly knew how to communicate. And she was the colored mammy in the Payne family in Virginia, into which I married. And she lived to be 115 years old, and I want to tell you an actual experience about our Grancy. If I ever write a book, one chapter will be dedicated to Grancy. She was illiterate, and my husband's mother taught her to read and write some. She could actually write a letter in her later years. She lived to be 115, remembered the soldiers who came back from Appomattox and could tell you all about it. But she was basically and inherently good. She had as many of God's attributes as any human being I have ever known. Love and loyalty and respect. She was a marvelous person, and it was great to know her, and I'll always thank God for the experience. We took her over to Huntington on a trip. She'd never been anyplace, right there on the farm in Virginia. So we took her over there, and as we came near the city, I happened to think about something that might provoke some wisdom from Grancy, word-wise, because believe it or not, the Greeks might have had a word for it, but they'd never met Grancy, or they wouldn't feel so big-headed about it. So I told Wyatt, I said, when we get home, we'll take Grancy in the living room, and you light the logs. We had the gas logs in there, and I said, I want to see what Grancy will say. So we took her in the living room, put her down in the best chair, and my husband lit the gas logs. Grancy sat there for it seemed an interminable time, and finally she said, looking at the gas logs, finally this came. Lord, help us for Jesus' sake. They done bought the burning bush in the parlor. Now, you have no trouble understanding what Grancy was talking about, do you? No communication gap at all. She wondered why in the world the logs didn't burn up. But of course they didn't. Now today, all we need is just a little simple English and a little understanding and a lot of truth and some action, and we can clean up the Aegean stables of the United States of America. Nobody's going to do it except the good conservative people, and you certainly come in that class. And so along that line, I want to give you a few ideas I've been thinking about recently. And they're called shattered values from grandma to the Constitution. One of the definitions of the word value in Webster's dictionary is, quote, the estimate one places on his possessions as compared with others independently of any intent to sell, end of quote. It is imperative today that Americans, with gumption enough to recognize priorities, properly estimate these possession values and come alive to the fact that by any and all comparisons with other countries, they were once the priceless possession of every American, and that they were not then, nor are they now, for sale. So I want to talk to you about the shattered values which were once our constitutional possessions. In this speed-crazy marathon world today, it's pretty hard to get time, to find time, to evaluate anything. And yet, this just must be done. And you may wonder why, in this vast world, that we should even take time in this wonderful God, family, and country rally to enumerate and to reconsider these lost possessions, values, because in the aggregate they represent and verify the successful ingredients of our nationhood, and we cannot rationally proceed to retrieve these lost treasures unless and until we find out why and where they were lost and by whom. The latter is very important. Lincoln said it in 1858, quote, "If we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could better judge what to do and how to do it." End of quote. Perhaps we should follow his wise observation, and although the dear gullible lay American was not privy to the Gulf of Tonkin deceptive setup, nor of any other setup which eventually led us into wars, declared and undeclared, and into American traps on American traps like the United Nations and the myriads of treaties which negate our Constitution, it is still high time that we the people ask some questions and demand some common sense and pro-American answers. Where shall we ask them? Everywhere, but particularly demand them from the candidates whom you are to elect to office. Ask them these questions and make him take time to listen. You'd be surprised how much they will learn when they listen to you, a good, conservative, patriotic, Christian American. They need you, so be sure that you find time to communicate with them. Ask them these particular questions. Ask them what happened to our tangible freedom for the individual, which made his pursuit of happiness a challenge leading to success in America. Ask him what happened to the American dream, which was always possible for those sturdy souls who were frugal, energetic, willing to work, and motivated by divine guidance to live a life with a purpose. Today, the substitute for this proven success formula is sophisticated poverty, and personally, I'm sick of it. I live in West Virginia. You know how it is in West Virginia. You've read the papers. Nobody used to know where we were. But then they put us and categorized it and put us in Appalachia, and we always were poor, and we didn't know it. We were just happy as anything. We didn't know we were poor, but we got to reading in the paper about we were in Appalachia, and everybody in Appalachia is poor. And finally we got the complex and the disease. And this was all prepared in Washington for us because they intended to use Appalachia as their guinea pig experiment for the next heavens knows when. We're right in the middle of it yet today. But today, in this sophisticated poverty area, and I know the areas very well because I work in most all of the clubs and the work in Huntington and in West Virginia, which have to do with many of these things. And we had the Job Corps in Huntington, West Virginia. It's one of the great marks on our little, what the men on the farm used to have a gun and they went hunting, they'd cut a little place on it where they killed a bear or whatever not. Anyway, we have so many notches, on our progress gun to save America. And this is one of them. Because, believe it or not, we got rid of the Job Corps in my town, and we don't have it anymore. But we have it there. And then the VISTA program, of course, came into West Virginia. But my point is, I have worked with the indigent and with the people whom the government were using for these various experiments, and I know what I'm talking about. So sophisticated poverty is the new thing. It's the gold rush to the welfare elite, the 400, if you please. Now, we are told that giving these people who won't work or prepare themselves for work a continuing subsidy will give them dignity. Now, they will want to try, and are going to try, to double or triple the welfare money and put these people on an annual income basis. I assume on the basis and of the theory that doubling their money will double their dignity. From my experience with some of these groups, it doubles their arrogance instead. Now, I am not at all speaking about the people who are really in need of help, the people the elderly people and other people who may be in desperate need. I'm not speaking about those people. I'm speaking about the barnacles on the ship of state who will not work, who could work if they wanted to, and are too lazy to work. and find that getting a government check and sitting in the shade of the tree and whittling is much easier than getting up and being somebody worthwhile. These are the people I'm talking about, and we have too many of them today in this country. My father was a doctor and surgeon, and he was a very busy man. He had a hospital, and I remember as a child, I used to go with him when we went to the poorhouse. And I want to tell you, the federal government didn't pay my father, the county didn't pay my father, but he donated his service to those who were ill in the poorhouse. But one point I remember in retrospect, and that is that when we visited the poorhouse, I noticed that there were very few people in the poorhouse in those days. That was before it became the in thing to do. Very few people there, and it was a good idea. Now, these people who were not in the poorhouse, many people were not wealthy, we certainly were not, but these people worked and kept their dignity. And our system of government in those days abounded with opportunities and rewards for such citizens. Not anymore. The rewards go to the dropouts, indolent, agitators, and professional shiftless. For those who care, you see, it makes a big difference. And I'd like to spend about an hour with you on telling you what they have done to West Virginia through their Appalachian program, the government itself. In other words, they're doing something to the people, not for them. Now back to the values, and the ones we must consider in this great meeting. And that's the reason, maybe as the keynote speaker or some kind of a speaker, I got started here before most anybody, I want us to consider these things for the reasons that I gave. They are the ingredients of our nationhood, and we must retrieve these. We're spending entirely too much time shadowboxing with unreality. There are certain areas in which you must work, and if we don't work in these areas, the communists are tickled to death. They give us enough busy work to keep us busy all the time anyway, and we must learn the difference and where to put our efforts. For myself, any project to which I will give any attention or any time, I must ask myself this question: what will the end result of this be for my country? Is this project worthwhile? Will it make it safe for America? If it won't, then there wouldn't be money enough in creation to get me to give a minute to it. So we have to have priorities in these days. So we even have to ask, where are the values which came from the Mayflower Pact, from the Declaration of Independence, from the Constitution? What are those values once possessed? They were our possessions. They were not for sale. What happened to the God-ordained values in fidelity in marriage and a Christ-centered home? What happened to the unpressured, normal living? Now, mind you, something happened. It was a happening. They're still having a lot of happenings. These were the main happenings that we want to talk about. What happened to the free enterprise system, which was the envy of the world because it was so successful? What happened to the values in American history, which were revered and handed down to each generation to guide and safeguard the nation? I'll tell you what happened. The people I'm going to speak about in a few minutes took every American concept and precept out of the history books. And it was done under John Dewey and Kilpatrick and George Counts and these people. Planned? Yes. Executed? Yes. What is the end result? Talk about generation gap. We have 2 generations of young people who simply have no way to know what this country was and what it was supposed to be. You had to come up in a home. I remember very well when some of this started in our home, I went right quick to the McGuffey readers and to Ray's Arithmetic. When they started in the new arithmetic business, I got the Ray's Arithmetic out, and we saw to it that our 3 daughters got the same thing that I got. And why was I so anxious for them to have it? Because I knew as a teacher there were no substitutes for these sound, basic things. And I wanted to pass it on to the next generations, which we have done in our family. But it wasn't easy with the whole school system going the other way. In other words, what happened to all of these things? What happened to the marketplace? What happened to money? And what happened that made us the slaves of money made mysterious? Who's the culprit? Excuse me, let's find out. Now then, what happened to the sound basic foundations in this country? They are gone or going fast. The fumbling socialist experiments changed every facet of American life. Now, what happened to the Christian churches in this country? Once the stabilizer and protector of everything we hold dear in earth and in heaven. What happened to the churches? And every time I say what happened, I also would like to say who happened. Who were the people responsible for this? And you will never solve it this side of the who. You can know all about the where, the how, the why, the when, but you'd better find out who did this to this particular project in this country. And you can find out. And I am very glad. As I say, I'd like to salute you for being serious searchers and researchers for the truth, where we will find the answers. And thank God we are not hindered in this meeting by political threats that truth is a classified secret document. We are going to, we shall tell it to the people until they are free again. This is the biblical promise, and we should use it. So, before giving you my thoughts on how to be a do-it American in your local community, I want to go now from the Constitution to Grandma. And I want to read you a very delightful piece, which is true. It was written by a little girl in the 3rd grade about Grandma. I think one of the saddest things in our country today is that terrible gap between the grandma and her grandchildren. It isn't true always, but it's true too many times. Because maybe when the grandchild needs her grandmother, she's off in a rest home someplace, and she doesn't get to see her except on visiting days. So this little girl in the 3rd grade wrote this salute to grandmother, and I think you'll just love it. A grandmother is a lady who has no children of her own, so she likes other people's little children. A grandfather is a man grandmother. Grandmothers don't have to do anything except just be there. They are old, so they shouldn't play hard or run. It is enough if they drive you to the market where the pretend horse is and have lots of dinner ready for you. Or if they take us for walks, they always slow down past things like pretty leaves and caterpillars. They never say hurry up. Usually they are fat, but they're not too fat to tie kids' shoes. They wear glasses and funny underwear. They can take their teeth and their gums off. It is better if they don't typewrite or play cards, except with us. They don't have to be smart, only answer questions like why dogs hate cats or why God isn't married. They don't talk baby talk like visitors do, because it's hard to understand. When they read to us, they don't skip or mind it if they tell the same story over and over again. Everybody should try to have a grandmother, especially if they don't have a television. Because grandmas are the only grown-ups that have got time for little girls. Isn't that beautiful? That was really written. Now, in talking to you, I would like for you to have a sales talk. We are under some sort of a delusion, those of us who come to these marvelous rallies and go to other patriotic meetings, that everybody knows all we know. And goodness knows we don't know too much, or we wouldn't have been in this shape anyway. But the point is, most of the people in every category know practically nothing about what is going on in the United States. And our most important work is to spend every minute we can informing people about the truth, on the conditions in this country. There is a way to do that. You can just meet people in a small group, or you can have a study club, which I'm going to tell you about in a little bit, which has been so successful in my hometown. But the point is, find out yourself the right kind of a sales talk, at least one good enough to interest the person to whom you are speaking in finding out more about how to work at the community level. Make them want to be a do-it-yourself American. It's the most exhilarating life they'll ever have, and they'll be very, very grateful to you. And so I try to teach them, or to remind them of the facts, and they'll go hunt it up, I hope, in 4 categories. What happened to the United States in 4 categories, because these take care of all the rest of the things. And in order to do that, I want them to know some names and some dates. Now, we read all the time that it took over 300 years to bring about the fall of Rome. Well, we're about to do it in 60. Of course, we go faster than anybody on earth, as you know. And what we do quickly. And I don't know who'll pick up the ashes and the crashes, but we really have, it's just been overworked. But what we do try to do well, and believe me, the devil and his advocates know how to plan. So, since 1905, and I begin there because people can't rationalize and can't take it all in. Bring it down to a sphere that people can get it all into one picture and get it into focus. And you don't need to go back to 300 or 400 years and all that sort of business. Go back to 1905 when they formed the first collegiate socialist society in America, when the socialists first met in New York. People will remember the date, 1905, because for all practical purposes, that's when it began for us. And I want everybody to know this. I want them to be able to go and tell other people about it, you see. And so when they got it organized, it was important to know some of the people who were there, of course, and I'm going to give you a few of those names today. And they just right away decided to move in with the Rand School of Social Sciences, and so then the Intercollegiate Socialist Society and the Rand School went along beautifully together. And I want to give you just these few names, because these were the people who were sent to certain places to start the socialist program in the United States. And they decided on education. Why did they decide on education? Because that made sense, and these people make sense. We just do anything and put anybody on a committee and wonder what happened to the project. They don't work like that. And we'd better learn a lesson or two from them. So we find Walter Lippmann, president of the Harvard Club, the socialist club there, with such illustrious names as Haywood Broun was a charter member, David Suppos, a student from Russia, was president at Wisconsin, Frida Kirschway, president at Harvard, Vida Scudder at Wellesley, Bruce Bliven at Stanford. I want you to remember these names. Vladimir Karapetov at Cornell, Alexander Trachtenberg at Trinity, John Spargo at Amherst, Mary Sanford at Vassar, Walter Reuther at Wayne, where else? And Eugene V. Debs at Columbia University. Now, having been accepted in the Ivy League, such big names as these, it was pretty easy to organize socialist societies on the campuses there. And they soon started by having lecturers and writers, and it just went like wildfire. When we go to do anything, as I say in the United States, we can start anything from a cult. California has the market cornered on cults. They can just start one on every corner, and they'll have, somebody there by morning. There's no doubt about that. But we've gotten to be a cult society. Really, we have. Everything from, the mysterious cults to those that aren't so mysterious. But then I want to mention a few other names. Their lecturers and writers were Ella Reeves Bloor. Now, there's something personal about that which you may be interested in, and just an aside here. When I guess you've heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys, Henry Dewey Hatfield was one of the greatest men this nation ever had. He should have been the President of the United States. He was a senator from West Virginia. And he and my father went to school together. Both were doctors and surgeons. And of course I knew the Hatfields quite well. One day when Dr. Hatfield was governor, he got a call from a little town called Thurman on the C&O Railway. And they said a woman was in a boxcar, and it was in the middle of the winter, very cold, and she was lying up there without a cover, any blanket at all, and with just a light coat on, and they thought she had pneumonia. And the governor sent up to Thurman to get this woman. When he got her into the hospital, she was unconscious. When she regained consciousness, they found that it was Ella Bluer, and she was working up in the coal fields at that time, organizing the union people and working with them. Dr. Hatfield was a humanitarian, like all doctors used to be, and a lot of them still are. And so, of course, what he did was keep her in the hospital until she was well enough to leave, didn't charge her anything, and she went on her merry way. So I knew that name quite well. Then we had J. Lovestone, Francis Perkins, you know Francis Perkins, Algernon Lee, Lincoln Steffens, Rose Stokes, and Victor Berger, the first socialist congressman from Wisconsin, or from anywhere in the Congress. Brooke White, Scott Nearing, Reverend John J. Holmes, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Now you heard the name Du Bois this morning. In other words, whatever is wrong in the United States today is wrong because these people planned so well and worked their plan. These people were all active socialists, and I'm sure you remembered a lot of their names. Very soon, of course, they had their socialist societies all over the country. Now you're getting the picture. And in 21, the ISS changed its name to the League for Industrial Democracy, which still goes. Now, you people know, many people here know every bit of this. But I want to tell you it isn't enough for you to know it. Who else knows it in your block? Who else knows it in your town? Who else knows it in your church? Now, we're supposed to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Well, I want to tell you that preaching the gospel today includes preaching about the people who will wreck the gospel and wreck this Christian nation. We have to know who they are and what they're about to do to this great country. Then we come to Norman Thomas and Harry Laidler, Paul Blanchard, Louis Bedens. And by 1940, my nemesis came along, John Dewey. Long before that, as a matter of fact, he was writing and was very, very left-wing, and I had known him before that time. But John Dewey was the president of LID with Reinhold Niebuhr as treasurer. And socialism was a fixture in the life of the nation. And from an obscure loft in Lower Manhattan and the Rand School had been graduated the first advocates of indoctrinated social revolution in the United States. And since then, look where we have come. They entered into the labor movement and into politics, and then I want to take you, as I say, to the next step. During this time, when I was after these teachers, I went 14 straight years as a delegate to the National Convention of the Educational Association in Atlantic City. And it was there that I first got on my feet in the business session and exposed John Dewey. And I didn't know it had been worth anything or that it ever would amount to anything, but the next morning the New York Times took me on pretty well in a whole column down the front page, and I knew it must have said something that was right on God's side, you see. This is the way you get your proof. But from that time on, I just never did let John Dewey rest, because the progressive education had in it the seeds of undoing everything that we held dear in this country. And they used education for it. Why? Because they had a captive audience in every county, at the state level, in the universities, a captive audience of fine young American students at taxpayers' expense. Now, don't you think that was pretty smart? Of course it was, and that's why they chose education. It started there. After that, they had to go, of course, the next place was, they'd found their man by that time, and I'm not going to take time to go into all of that. But somehow or other, they always find their leaders. I wonder if we're going to find ours. right at the time when they needed him most, where was Franklin Delano Roosevelt? He was waiting in the corridor, I can assure you. And so, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the White House, it was very easy then to take these people who had been trained in education and transplant them, move them bodily from education, the big Ivy League schools, to these high echelon places in government. And Felix Frankfurter was assigned to do that. He had trained many of these men. Notice I use the word trained advisedly. And he had trained many of these men himself, so was naturally the one who should select them. And so then we started getting our bright young brains, end of quote, in Washington. And I decided to do a research on the literature from the services, their booklets and pamphlets, with some of Dewey's writings and Kilpatrick and George Counts and these people. And I decided to do a comparative research which lasted about a year. It was a pretty serious research and pretty hard to do. And the reason I wanted to do it was that I had found out in the meantime, because when I went to Columbia, some of you may have heard me say this, I wanted to go to Columbia, and I didn't know why, but when I graduated, everybody was going to Columbia. It was just a national phobia to go to Columbia. And I came home and I told my mother I wanted to go to Columbia. And she thought that was silly with Marshall College right up the street, And but I said, she said, why do you want to go? I said, I don't know. But I said, everybody from the university wants to go to Columbia. And I said, they talk like if you don't go, it's just you'll be a moron. And I said, I can't spell that word, but it sounds bad and I don't want to be one. And so I'd like to go see. And that's how I happened to go to Columbia University. But when I got there, when I heard these men, as I say, I was brought up in just a normal Christian American home. And I didn't know what on earth they were talking about. I thought they were in a foreign country. Whatever it was un-American. I knew that. And I was just born to find out. I want to know what's back of everything before I proceed to do anything about it. So when I went back, I watched them very carefully, and if they would lecture anywhere, sometimes in 50 miles of New York City, but to a different group. I kept noticing they were always lecturing to other groups. And Unitarians and, well, we won't go all the way down that list. But, these folks who don't believe like us. That's fair enough and kind enough, isn't it? And a lot of times they went to the Unitarians and they went to the different cults and whatnot. But we would go to hear them speak. Several of the girls would go with me, and we would go and hear them speak. You see, we didn't know then that every one of these leading professors had Communist Front affiliations, even then. Now, the point I want to make is they keep trying to play down communism today. Well, I can tell you, you don't play it down. It was always there. When our problems started to mount, the communists were back of it, and the socialists. They are still there today, but we didn't know it. But when I found out that William Kilpatrick had Communist Front affiliations, John Dewey had Communist Front affiliations, 21, and one of them had 19, George Counts had 34, Jerome Davis had 118, Stringfellow Barr had 28. You can go down the list. And every person who was influencing the writing of textbooks, influencing the training of teachers at Teachers College, where I was, in Columbia, had Communist fronts. So I set about right away to learn what the communists were, who they were, how they were working, and why these men were talking like they talked, and why they were taking American histories and rewriting them completely. And that was my work for about 30 years. And then, as I say, at this time, having done that, I wanted to do the research on the manuals, the government manuals. And here were these same people, some of whom I'd met in education, over there in government, doing the very same thing, influencing the young servicemen, just like they were influencing the students in college. So now we have this thing with education and government under the same socialist umbrella, beginning to be very communist, as one of the speakers said this morning, how they were changing to that. Now then, of course, Willard Givens, and we won't take time to even talk about him anymore, but he is the one that wrote the original manifesto and finally got the 1,000 people from the Department of Superintendents of the NEA to come out with the masterpiece, which was really the communist program. And the next step after government, of course, the unions then came. Walter Reuther was right in that. You know where Walter Reuther got his training, he and Victor. And we won't take time here to do it. But I want to tell you, when you're talking to other people, you take time to do it. And you read them the letter. You read them the letter from Walter and Victor, which they wrote from Russia, and what they thought this country ought to be. Now then, we came to the final tragedy. I think we could actually have saved the United States from all of these three. Then we came to the very last thing, the churches. And when we got to the churches, as I say we could have saved the other situations, but when the churches were completely taken over, and I mean completely, it's almost total today in both Catholic and Protestants, then we really were in trouble. And I have often said to people, in the church groups, we've had big scraps in our own church about this, and the next president of the American Baptist Church will be our own minister from my church in Huntington, West Virginia, Dr. Woodrow Wilson Clark. And he's a natural for these people. He's a reconciliation fellow, Fellowship of Reconciliation, goes along with Dahlberg and with McBain and all of these people. He's a perfect stooge for them. He's just right. He really is. So we're going to have the honor, end of quote, of having the next president of the American Baptist Association. He could have been that this time, but he said he couldn't leave his church long enough. And the reason he's afraid to do that, he's afraid we'd fire him. But people say to me, well, why do you stay in that church? How in the world can you stay in that church? And I've said many times, it's my church and I love it, and I have years of work in this church, and I want to stay right here. Dr. Clark has not been with us very long, about 10 years, but I'd rather stay here and help him pack than to move myself. And that's exactly what we intend to do. Now, about the churches, I asked these people, when Dahlberg was there, we had a question and answer period, you see, and I just asked him right out why it was that these people, for instance, like Harry F. Ward, why did he have to go visit Stalin before he started his program of work here and before he went to China? He went twice to visit Stalin. And then I said, why in the world did some of these other people have to go to visit Rauschenbusch? Why did he go and visit the Webb, Sidney and Beatrice, in London before he started his church work? Well, you see, it puts a very different light on their church work, and it puts plenty of suspicion on them, and they deserve it. But the church was undermined by a very, very few people. But the dear lay members sitting in the pews just sit there and worry. They worry themselves to death while the devil's working his program, don't you see? And so it's just been ridiculous. First in education, then in government, and then in the unions, and now in the churches. And the communists, when you check the leaders of all of these groups, you will find that they have communist front affiliations, even the ministers. And that's why I say we must not go to sleep and buy this new package they're handing around, that communism is softening. It's not as bad as it used to be. It's the same communist criminal conspiracy. That's what it is. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my study club and what we're doing. And this is all ad-lib business. I always can find something to do. I can't imagine these people that have nothing to do, but there are a lot of people like that. A lot of my friends are like that. And if I were in their place, I couldn't go to sleep at night. The last thing to come up in West Virginia is something I feel you might be interested in. You will remember, those in this group, many of you will know, about the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee, where Martin Luther King went and a good many of these other people and so forth. Don West and what have you. And then about Commonwealth College down in Mena, Arkansas. You also will know that finally, in both cases, Tennessee and Arkansas, they put them out of business, and they are no longer permitted to operate. Now, I picked up a piece of, just a small piece of paper, an article, one day in the paper, and it said, this is about 2 years after these schools were closed, that the holding company for these schools had decided to build 5 other new schools. They were going to build 3 in the United States, and 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Puerto Rico. Shortly after that, the Charleston Gazette came out with a full-page article on a new school which was to be built in West Virginia, my home state. This school is up not too far from White Sulphur Springs, up in the beautiful part of our state, and over near Hinton. And it said in this article about the holding company that these would be built. It didn't give a date, but said one of them would be started shortly. And I don't know whether this is the school. I'm not saying that it is. But it's very interesting. This is the article, one of the articles from the Gazette. And there's a very attractive picture on the paper, front of the paper. And it tells about the starting of this new school. Interestingly enough, they call them folk schools, folk centers, folk music. How folk got all into this, you know about that. David Noble knows a good bit about that. But where did they get their money? People started asking in West Virginia, because this praised the place. And if you'd read what it says about it, it is really something. This is a school for dropouts, and it's also a school for teaching music, the guitars and all that sort of thing. They have a world encampment for citizenship, and it's called the Pipestem Folk Music Center. It says it's a school for dropouts, and they're going to teach cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropology. Believe it or not, I'm serious, it's in here. This is what they're going to do. And where did they get their first $10,000? Well, I'll tell you where they got it. Mrs. Wilbur J. Cohen, wife of the head of the Health, Education, and Welfare, brought them the first $10,000 when she came to visit the school. And the children go. Vista was there. They get out and work in the yards and all that sort of thing. He bought 164 acres for this school, and nobody knows what's going on. Now, I hate to have to tell you this part, but I think I should. It's a part of the work that I try to do with the help of others, and no man is an island. Nobody can do anything just by themselves. You do need a starter, and then you need good people, dependable people, and you need a project to work on, and there's always a project to work on. And this is where our study club came in. I started the study club particularly because I wanted to expose the National Council of Churches, because I know what it is, and you know what it is, but it's just taken over our church completely. So this is the reason I felt I wanted to get inside the church, but next to the lay people, not just the deacons and the minister. And so I started the study club, and I selected 5 people. And the people I selected, you'd be surprised. I figured all this out, and it hoped that it would work. I thought it made sense. I prayed that it would make sense. I wanted somebody from the church that the minister was afraid of. Now, isn't that awful? The motivation was still good, believe it or not. But who are the only people in your church your minister's afraid of? I'll tell you who they are. Your best Bible teachers. Your best Bible teachers. And from my own church, I selected 5 of the leading women in that church, all of whom were Sunday school teachers, and 2 of whom are just expert Bible authorities. And they came. I selected these 5 people, And they met over in our home, and I told them what I wanted to do. I got 5 Presbyterians, 5 from the Episcopal Church, 5 from the Methodist Church, and I got some from the Catholic Church, and we all sat down, and I told them what I wanted to do. I said, I want to have a study club which is different from any study club that I have ever known. And I belong to about everything anybody organizes except the Communist Party. But these things come and go. They don't live long enough to be of any permanent value, too many of these committees. And I wanted one that would live and continue to live and could teach other people how to do and how to work. And I told them there's no way in the world to get to the National Council of Churches and to keep them from subverting the church and to save your church from it except to find out the truth about it and know how to select a minister. And that's really how it started. Then I went out about 3 or 4 miles out in the city and selected 2 or 3 from other smaller churches, and then way out in the county and got 1 from some of the other leading small churches in the county. And we have the study club. We don't have any dues, and we have no publicity. And this is very important, no publicity. We meet once a month, and we go over everything that needs attention in our town and in our state. We go over the legislation, and we write letters and send wires on very pertinent things, and we do it at the proper time, and so forth. And these women just love to go. We have some members from my study club here today. They just got in at noon, and I'm just real glad they're here. But the point is, they're given an assignment with teeth in it, something to really do, and they can feel like they are of value to their country. And these men will say, and the women will say, well, we didn't know there was anything we could do. Now they have found out how to work. And so in working on even this Pipestem thing, it was so valuable to have them as standing with you here. Then I picked up a paper, the Charleston Gazette, again. The Charleston Gazette is really something. I mean, it's the leading paper in the state. It's as left-wing as it can be. You know what I mean? They need another title on the masthead, but they haven't put it there yet. And I didn't call them anything, did I? But anyway, picked up the Charleston Gazette again, and lo and behold, there were 2 pictures in the Charleston Gazette. And here was Pipestem again. Now, this man, Don West, who bought these 168 beautiful acres in West Virginia, is really going to town with Pipestem, with this school. And here was a picture of General Westmoreland's daughter and his wife at Pipestem, and she had come there to spend the summer. Now, what am I supposed to do in a case like this? Nothing? No. I felt this was my assignment and that something could be done. And I got in contact right away. I called a friend on the West Coast, and whom I felt would have the quick contact with General Westmoreland, and I gave him the data and the information. Told him the picture, of course. Told him I was sending him the clippings and so forth, but I called him. Now I said, I'm sure General Westmoreland doesn't know about Don West and about this school. But what interests me most is how he gets these students. Where are his feeders? Where do they come from? Because the place was just filling up there. As fast as they could build a building, it was filled up with these students. And so, believe it or not, he got to work on it right away, as I knew he would. And in 3 days from that time, General Westmoreland sent Mrs. Westmoreland back down there. She had gone back to Washington, and they took the daughter out of that school. How did she get there? I'll tell you how she did. They sent her to a small school in California because she was young, and they hoped that that would be a good idea, and thought it was. But one of her professors was a very good friend of Don West. When Don West was before the committee in Washington, he took the Fifth Amendment. He has always worked with the communists, and we are very suspicious about the whole school. And that is the next to the latest challenge in West Virginia. In my hometown, they wanted to set up on the civil rights thing. We had a civil rights group, of course, in Huntington. We have one, the head of it, and always stirring up everything. And my husband's in the real estate business, and we know about these things. And it's just tragic. You have no freedom for anything in this country today. It's just awful. But we're trying to work at it. We're trying to alert enough people, because it's the people that will change this thing if it's changed. But we have to make sense, and we have to be practical about these things. The latest challenge to come to us is this one. Antioch College will open a branch for Appalachian Studies in Huntington, West Virginia. That's the latest one. Now, we had a Marshall University president, and we had a fight about SDS. He said he was going to recognize the SDS. We did everything in the world we could to stop that, but he still recognized the SDS. But I want to tell you, Annie doesn't live there anymore. He overplayed his hand. We told him if he did that, and he'd only been there 2 years, we think he was sent there, actually, to be the kind of a president he turned out to be. But, be that as it may, we told him if he recognized the SDS, he couldn't be president of Marshall very long. Now, that takes a lot of nerve to tell the president of a school that sort of a thing. But we thought we could do it. It took a lot of organization, a lot of work. Worked with the alumni, worked with the governor, worked with everybody in sight. But all you needed was the truth about what this man was going to do to Marshall University. And I want to tell you, we got rid of him. And so the Charleston Gazette, bless their hearts, they take me on about every 2-3 months editorially. And so the Charleston Gazette, as soon as this man came to Marshall University, about 2 weeks after he was there, they wrote an editorial welcoming him to the state. But they said in the editorial that somewhere along the line you will be meeting Mrs. E. Wyatt Payne. That's what they told him. Now that was a terrible thing to do, don't you think? No, be still. Don't take my time. The other fellows took about an hour and a half, before I got started. Something might happen here. But anyway, really happens. Sometimes you feel like, well, you never get any credit for what you do. I'm not looking for credit. I'm looking to get the job done. But the point is that when they say in Charleston that when the Charleston Gazette takes you on, you just know you're right. This is confirmation. But now, having told the new man that, and we got rid of him, I think you might be interested in a letter here. As I say, we take on all kinds of projects, and we don't quit until we win. But this is the latest editorial from the Gazette. MU president will be tested. Big headlines. A Tuesday attraction of the Marshall University Artist Series was the Siberian dancers and singers. Even a freshman would recognize it as a Russian troupe. Marshall University is in Huntington. Mrs. E. Wyatt Payne is in Huntington. Ready to answer her call to alarm are thousands of loyal Huntingtonians who are sensitive to the subtlest anti-Americanism, and I thought that was sort of a nice thing for them to say, don't you think? I don't know what kind of a derogatory remark they thought that was. But anyway, how long will Mrs. E. Wyatt Payne and her followers let Marshall University get away with exposing helpless students to Russian influences? Not long, we dare say. Mrs. Payne isn't one to be put off by the customary academic justifications for treason, and she knows she can count on the loyal townspeople. Isn't that beautiful? During the course of legislative debate on congressional redistricting, a delegate remarked innocently that Charleston tends to be a liberal community and that Huntington tends to be conservative. He may have been wrong about Charleston, but he surely was right about Huntington. Bless our dear hearts. Anyway, and you may be sure, still reading, you may be sure the new Marshall President's Medal, now this is after we got the new one, the new President's Medal will be tested by Mrs. Payne and her vigilantes from various fundamental churches and women's clubs. He'd be advised to discourage the appearance of Russian dancers and singers until he is more firmly established. Mrs. Payne, he will shortly learn, means business. That's, well, the point is that it is recognized over the state, really it is, and in Kentucky and Ohio, we're right in the tri-state area there, that we do have a group of women in Huntington who dare to do. And we are so grateful for it, and we thank God for it every day. So I'm going to close just by simply reminding you that we have taken on all kinds of fights during the last 7 years since our study group started. And it's very active and very virile. And we're not afraid of anybody because we think we're fighting God's battle. We want to do what is necessary to be done, whether it's popular or whether it isn't. And so we were able to keep the civil rights people out of our city hall. They asked to be in the city hall, believe it or not, and to get in as actual entities of city government. Nobody elected them, nobody ever voted for them or anything else. But this was the demand. And we fought 3 rounds on this and finally demanded and won of the city council that they have a referendum and let the town vote. And we beat them 3-1 on that. And the civil rights groups did not get inside the city government as a part of it. And they're not there today. And we think it'll be some time before they ever try that one again, because that was a hard-fought battle. But the battle must be won. And so, as Lincoln said, find out where you are and where you're going. Do the job closest to you. Ask yourself if this particular project is worth your time and effort, and is it safe for America? Whatever you do, be active in politics. Know that this is the truism. Don't ever forget it. We're never more than just 2 years away from saving or losing America. The next Congress you elect will do one or the other. That's how close you are to a job that needs to be done. So, as Lincoln said, find out where you are and where you're going. And then I don't want you to leave us without any hope, because there's always hope for God's people. But I want us to learn the lesson from another great American, and that was George Washington. And let us just close by thinking what he said. He found the formula for the greatest victories over all evil, whether it's in your church, in your government, in your educational groups, or whatnot. We fought the battle of sex education, by the way, in Huntington, and won. They lost it in Charleston, but we won. That's another one. I forgot to put that one in. But remember, that's okay. Don't do that. But the point is to keep up the battle and keep up your courage, knowing that you are working in his kingdom. Now, Washington gave us the formula. In his darkest days at Valley Forge, and days have been no darker, certainly they were dark for George Washington. They are as dark, I think, today for us. But George Washington did 3 things. He first prayed. Number 2, he gave the safest command ever given by a general on a battlefield. What was the command? Let none but Americans be on guard tonight. Suppose we had used that when they started dropping the communist and socialist bombs in the textbooks. Where were the guards who were supposed to be guarding education? They were not there. Apply this to everything you do, club work, church work, political work, and everything else. Is your congressman safe for America? He may have a PhD. He may be qualified in every other area. But is he safe for your country? And if he isn't, don't elect him. Get to work and defeat him. They can be defeated, you know. We still have that much of a right in this country and the authority to do it. So Washington prayed, and then he said, let none but Americans be on guard tonight. And then he went into action with his troops. Now that's the formula for winning any battle, even today's battle. God help this great group and help us to know that whatever we know, we must share with our neighbors and with our community. It seems that we may have been chosen to lead the fight, and you have to have a leader. So go back home to your communities and organize some kind of a group you can count on, and then see that they are taught the very fundamentals of saving America. Give them the names of the culprits and teach them not to be afraid. I think that coming from this group and going out all over America, if we could just get these study groups started. This is a study group that will not die. It lives because it has the elixir of life in it. So thanks a million for being good Americans, and thanks a million for staying with what you believe. Too many people are deserting the ship, but I'm sure you will not do that. Thanks a lot.